CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The deadline for oxygen supplies passes for the missing submarine near the Titanic as more specialist teams join the search.
Our other headlines: China's Premier meets President Macron and urges deeper cooperation with France as he continues his first overseas trip since taking office.
An explosion at this restaurant in China on the eve of a national holiday. At least 31 people have died.
The Dragon Boat Festival in full swing in China. Traditional boat builders say business is roaring.
The rescue operation for the missing submarine exploring the Titanic has reached a critical point, with the supply of oxygen on board now believed to have run out.
This comes as the first underwater robot reaches the ocean floor to try to transmit images to the surface. Contact with the submarine, which has 5 people on board, was lost on Sunday as it made its descent to the wreck off Newfoundland in Canada. Well, the rescue mission is being run from Boston in the United States. The Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther is there for us. Philip, the United States Coast Guard saying that debris has been spotted in the search area. A very guarded statement, but that statement nonetheless.
Yes, it is. It's a very short tweet, in fact, that was sent out by the U.S. Coast Guard that's based here in Boston. It's so short that I'll read it out to you. A debris field was discovered within the search area by an ROV near the Titanic. Experts within the Unified Command are evaluating the information. And that is it from the U.S. Coast Guard. They will be holding a press conference here at 3 o'clock local time. That's in 3 hours' time, by which time maybe that evaluation will be complete. Of course, there is a lot missing out here. Where exactly was this found? They say that it was near the Titanic. Presumably that's on the ocean floor. An ROV, I just mentioned, that's a remotely operated vehicle. It's essentially an underwater drone that has been used to scour the area around the Titanic. So, of course, now's the time for realism. This could be a debris field that comes from the submersible, from the Titan. There was always that possibility that it might not be intact after it was lost on Sunday, that there might have been an implosion, some kind of an accident that meant that those 5 men weren't alive over the last few days. We simply don't know that. That was always one of the options. The others were that it might be found bobbing along the ocean on its surface, or that it might be found on the seabed. We will find out more from the Coast Guard very soon. But it was found by this increasingly international and larger search operation that is ongoing right now, maybe turning into a recovery operation now. There are more and more ships in that search area, in the remote area of the Atlantic Ocean. There were 5 there yesterday. That number is supposed to go up to 10 today. That includes the Atalante. That's a French research vessel that has a robot on board that should be able to maybe move that submersible if indeed it's found on the ocean floor, might be able to help recover it all together. Again, a lot of questions now going to be asked at the U.S. Coast Guard, and again, in 3 hours' time, we should be hearing more details from them.
Philip, until we get further confirmation, presumably a search and rescue operation continues, but we must be talking about a recovery operation then soon after.
Yeah, and that might already be confirmed in a few hours' time. We'll have to wait and see. That would, of course, be the moment where the Coast Guard, which is coordinating this search and rescue effort right now, would admit that there is no chance of finding any survivors. Right now, and this stems from yesterday's press conference from the Coast Guard, there is still a hope because it is still named a search and rescue mission, not a recovery mission. That's hope for the family members, of course, hope for those rescuers who are only just arriving in that area. An area, by the way, the search area, that has been made significantly bigger as well over the last 24 hours, says the Coast Guard, the size of twice the state of Connecticut here in the United States, depending on where you are in the world. Maybe if I tell you it's the size of the country of El Salvador in Central America, or the size of Belgium in Europe, gives you a closer idea of just how big this area is. And by the way, how deep it is as well, because that search ongoing at probably around 4 kilometers of depth. That is more or less where the Titanic wreckage is to be found. So that's a search and rescue effort ongoing, and as you say, it could very well turn into a recovery effort at some point.
Philip, thank you for that. Philip Crowther from the Associated Press in Boston in the United States.
Well, Simon Boxall is a senior lecturer in oceanography at the University of Southampton. I spoke to him just before this latest update from the US Coast Guard.
I think the hope's been fairly slim since day one, but I think, you know, the whole business about there are 96 hours of oxygen left on board, it's a very vague calculation, is that. So I think, you know, I think it's likely they will still treat this as a search and rescue operation, certainly for the next 24 hours, because that's the sort of, I suppose, uncertainty in the amount of oxygen and the rate at which it's being used up. Beyond that, I think it does become less hopeful. And as has been said, you know, there is this chance that actually on day one, the whole thing imploded. And we're looking now not for a submersible, but for wreckage. So I think, you know, it's likely that the Coast Guard from both US and Canada will talk about continuing this for another, maybe a couple of days. Beyond that, it becomes a recovery exercise, and at that stage, everything steps down because recovery is not urgent. The rescue is urgent, but once it gets to recovery, it's a question of then deciding how that should go forward. And it, you know, perhaps we shouldn't be throwing quite so many resources to recovery compared to rescue.
And a part of this search is being conducted at enormous depth, isn't it? What about the conditions that make it such a challenging operation?
Well, you're 4 kilometres away, so you can imagine operating on something. Imagine trying to repair a car or find something that's 4 kilometres away. And you're looking at an area the size, as you said, of Belgium. And your sort of the techniques we use, we can't use optics, we can't see the things on the seabed from above. We can't use radar, we can't use radio communications, infrared. We're stuck with sonar. And that's a bit like painting a sort of a road bridge across a huge estuary with a small child's paintbrush. It takes a long time to build up a picture of the seabed and to actually locate where this thing might be. Or another way of putting it, you know, you're in the dark in Belgium with a blindfold and you're going around trying to feel your way around to see if you can bump into it. It's a chance in a million they find it, and time is ticking. It's still going to take, even if they find it, and even if it goes as planned perfectly, it's still going to take 6 hours from finding it to get it to the surface. And that's under ideal conditions. They haven't found it yet. Will they find it? Highly unlikely.
Should people be making dives of this type to see the wreck of the Titanic, given that it's a clearly very dangerous thing to do?
No. It's simply no. You know, there's no point. It has no purpose. It's tourism. It's nothing to do with research. If we want to research things, we use remotely operated vehicles. They're safer, they're better, they're less expensive. They can do more than this particular submersible can do. So there is no benefit in terms of research. There's no benefit in terms of understanding what went on. It's purely tourism.
Now the rest of the day's news, and the Chinese Premier Li Qiang has set out his plans on deepening cooperation with France.
He's been meeting French President Emmanuel Macron at the Élysée Palace, where he outlined the need to strengthen ties during a dinner with Chinese and French business leaders. He's in the French capital as part of his first overseas trip since taking office.
The visit comes at a time when the European Union is seeking to reduce its reliance on Beijing. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ken Brown, watching events for us in Paris. Ken, just talk us through the day so far.
Yes, Chinese Premier Li Qiang arrived yesterday evening here in Paris. He's got 2.5–3 days of a really packed schedule. Just today, he engaged in bilateral talks with French President Emmanuel Macron. We're expecting similar lines to emerge from that, as we saw with his meeting a couple of days ago with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Top of the agenda was the Ukraine conflict, China's potential role in bringing about peace there. Also, the closer cooperation on the climate crisis and green technology, and of course the economy. Now, Li preempted the talks today when he talked about a 3-point proposal on deepening China-France cooperation, as you mentioned in your introduction. So what does that mean? China really wants win-win cooperation with Europe. That means a lowering of trade tensions and barriers on both sides, cooperation on technology, particularly green transformational technology. We heard two of Li's favorite themes. He talked about unswervingly sticking to reform and opening up. Second of all, he emphasized entrepreneurship and the role of business in ties between the nations. He's talked about reviewing rules and regulations, safeguarding the intellectual property rights of foreign companies in China. Both sides essentially want to be able to sell their products in their respective markets without too much trouble. Now, this comes, of course, as Europe has expressed concern about over-dependence on China. The EU's trade deficit is running at over $400 billion. That was a 2022 number. Germany recently published a national security strategy describing China as a partner, a competitor, and also a systemic rival. In response to that, Li has called for openness, again, cooperation. He says risk prevention and cooperation are not opposites. Now, Li will also address the new global financial pact, which is taking place here in Paris. Now, that's a summit where 50 heads of state will attend. It has an extremely ambitious aim to reinvent the global financial system, making it more inclusive and helping vulnerable nations. Solidarity is a word we're hearing a lot here in Paris.
Ken, thanks for that. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Paris.
At least 31 people have been killed and 7 injured in an explosion that ripped through a barbecue restaurant in China.
9 people have been held for questioning over the incident. A gas leak is suspected to have caused this blast. It happened in the evening when the restaurant was busy ahead of the National Dragon Boat holiday.
Our correspondent Sun Tianyuan has the latest on the investigation.
I'm in northwest China's Yinchuan city, where a deadly explosion rocked a barbecue restaurant at around 8:40 last night during a peak dining time. Authorities have briefed media on the investigation, and the initial results indicate that the explosion was caused by a gas leak. Chinese President Xi Jinping has urged all-out efforts to treat the injured. The casualties have been taken to a nearby hospital last night. China's National Health Commission said this afternoon that all patients are in stable condition. Police have also detained 9 people related to the accident, including the manager, shareholders, and staff at the restaurant. Now, this is one of the deadliest accidents in China so far this year, and it happened a day before this year's Dragon Boat Festival, a traditional Chinese holiday. About 100 million trips are expected to be made during the 3-day holiday. That's up to around 30% compared to last year. Now, it is a time when many dine out with family and friends, and the deadly explosion here in Yinchuan will be a reminder to the public that safety is paramount. Sun Tianyuan, CGTN, Yinchuan, Ningxia Autonomous Region.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Turkey almost doubles its interest rates to cool runaway inflation, but the markets remain rather unimpressed.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world. accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. World leaders are meeting in Paris for a summit to overhaul the global financial system and help the world respond to climate change. Under discussion, the Bridgetown Initiative, proposals from developing countries led by Barbados to break the cycle of climate disasters, pushing poorer countries ever further into debt. So, what might this shake-up look like? Well, poorer countries argue that the way development finance works today is outdated. The world's financial system hasn't had a refresh since the 1940s. And they say that change is needed in the way that money is loaned and repaid. Development banks should mobilise an additional $1 trillion for poorer countries to help them move towards climate resilience. And the International Monetary Fund needs to suspend interest on loans for up to 3 years. There's also a call for the IMF to offer $100 billion a year in currency risk guarantees to help drive private sector investment in projects helping poorer countries move to a low-carbon economy. Our correspondent Nathalie Malras is in Paris. So, Nathalie, is there now a real resolve to make these fundamental changes to the global financial system?
It does indeed appear so. In fact, just hearing from some of the 50 heads of state and representatives of over 100 countries that are attending this financial summit in Paris, many have already, in their opening remarks and the roundtables that they've participated in, said that they feel encouraged and heartened by the announcements already made, the intention that is on the table, them sitting at this conversation and having their ideas not only considered but put into action. That has left them feeling really encouraged. We heard from the Prime Minister of Barbados earlier today in her opening remarks, Prime Minister Motley, that hard action needs to be taken by as early as tomorrow, not just in a figurative sense, but by the end of this two-day summit. These very real changes not only should be penciled in, but inked in. In fact, this is what she had to say a little earlier.
We do not ask for the bankruptcy of private companies. That's not our wish. But we do ask for everybody to share the burden so that we can share the bounty. And it therefore means that simply relying and holding only governments accountable has run its course. And what is necessary now is for us to bring to the table also multinational corporations whose balance sheets dwarf more than 2/3 of the world's states.
So it sounds like some signs of progress emerging from this summit, but what are the main sticking points?
Well, we're hearing from the world leaders who are gathered here that the developing nations and their presidents, their prime ministers and representatives saying they just have too much going on with the unemployment crisis. They're buckling under their debts. They're trying to protect their biodiversity and protect their economies. They're looking for more flexible and tailored financial programs best suited for their needs, best suited for particularly the countries that are worst affected by global warming that, if you just take an overview look, are the countries that contribute least to some of those harmful effects of climate change. We heard from the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, that in its current form, the financial system simply isn't fit for purpose, with the cost of natural disasters for last year alone running up $300 billion. This is weighing heavily on the economies of the most vulnerable nations, and an overhaul of the financial system is desperately needed, and soon.
Natalie, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Natalie Malhas in Paris.
Well, in Brazil, both the government and the private sector are investing in programmes and practices to try to tackle climate change. And while there's a will to do more, the funding is sometimes in rather short supply. Our correspondent Paulo Cabral reports.
From this plant in the Brazilian state of Minas Gerais, dairy products are shipped all over the country. It's a big operation with inevitable demands and impacts on nature, such as the intake of water for industrial processes and the use of soil on the farms where the milk is produced.
This plant sits at the heart of one of Brazil's main milk production districts, and working with their suppliers to develop better farming practices is one of the company's key strategies to promote a more sustainable and environmentally sound operation.
According to food company Danone, about 70% of the milk used here comes from small farmers. The French multinational's Flora program invests about $200,000 per year to help these farmers in the implementation of regenerative agriculture practices, which aim, for example, to conserve the soil. Besides environmental gains, such as reduced carbon emissions, company officials say these practices also improve productivity and milk quality.
The sustainability projects are mostly funded by Danone itself, but we are increasing our interactions with this whole ecosystem, including investment funds. And Danone itself also has an in-house fund that helps our branches over the world to invest in sustainability projects, including those related to climate change.
There's growing investment from companies in Brazil on this issue. They have been devoting larger chunks of their budgets for climate change action, but it still seems to be an initial movement. We think it's possible and necessary to increase these investments.
Brazil's public sector is also in need of more climate change-related funding, for example, to pay for initiatives to preserve the rainforest. Authorities say most of investments to date have come from the government's budget, but that this is not enough.
So we will have to rely upon the money coming internationally as investment. We will have to rely on the private sector from Brazil, and as well with the budget from the government. But definitely we will have to rely upon international investment.
Climate change is bound to impact humankind as a whole, and the growing consensus here is that all stakeholders involved need to invest in ways to mitigate its impact. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Poços de Caldas, Brazil.
Turkey's central bank has almost doubled the cost of borrowing to 15% in a bid to cool runaway inflation.
The decision by the country's new economic policymakers falls short of what the markets were expecting. The lira has halved in value over the past 2 years, and it fell to a new low after this rate rise was announced. It's now worth more than 24 to the dollar. Some top Wall Street banks say tougher action is needed to try to tackle Turkey's economic problems. Well, let's talk to Atilla Yeşilada, a specialist on the Turkish economy at Global Source Partners. Atilla, welcome back to the programme. Good to see you. Well, this was the first opportunity for the new central bank chief and the finance minister to prove their worth and get a grip. Have they done it?
No, they have completely failed. I call this not monetary tightening, but monetary tickling. We're not fighting inflation by choking the breath out of it, but by tickling it slowly to calm down. You live in a country where headline inflation is 40%, trend inflation is 45% and accelerating, and you raise the policy rate to 15%. Why bother? So, A, they have really lost credibility from the word go. B, these interest rates don't do anything to calm down housing demand or consumer durables demand. 3, it would not stop dollarization of the economy. And 4, it will not really bring in any foreign financial investment that's badly needed to replenish the FX reserves of the central bank.
Well, that's a very blunt assessment. I mean, so if this doesn't work, what next? What now?
Well, I think they'll tighten a few more steps, but if the scuttlebutt is to be believed, the new economy czar Mehmet Şimşek has cut a deal with President Erdogan not to raise interest rate beyond 25%. It so appears that a lot of the weight of balancing the economy, that is reducing the current account deficit, and in their view, reducing inflation, will fall on weaker currency. That's the Turkish lira will lose more value. And of course, the second thing is loans will not be available to the businesses and the households. That should also slow down the economy. But I'm not going to give you a long technical discussion. This is a very poor start. There is no way a central bank can catch up to 40% inflation when they're moving at a rate of 15%. So at the end, by the end of the year, when tourists go home, Turkey will be faced with the possibility of another devastating currency crisis.
Who do you believe is calling the shots here? I mean, does President Erdogan, still have a hold on economic policy?
Yes, I think so. Put it this way. During the previous administration, Erdogan phoned in to the central bank as to what needs to be done. Now, he apparently outlined to Mehmet Şimşek and Ms. Gaye Erkan what can be done. They are free to move within those parameters. The problem is the set parameters don't do anything to solve Turkey's chronic and very entrenched inflation or current account deficit problems.
It's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on the programme. Atilla Yeşilada, specialist on the Turkish economy at Global Source Partners in Istanbul.
UK mortgage holders will see payments go up again after the Bank of England raised interest rates to 5%, higher than predicted.
The rise by half a percentage point means rates are now at their highest level since the year 2008. The central bank governor, Andrew Bailey, said the rise was necessary to curb spending, with inflation stubbornly high at 8.7%.
But British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says he's still confident he can deliver on his pledge to halve inflation this year.
This is obviously a challenge that many countries are facing right now, but we are on it. We are on it and we are going to get through it. Now, that's not easy, as I said, and anyone tells you that it's easy or can happen overnight, they're not being straight with you, right? And I want to be honest with you, these things are tough. They require difficult decisions, but that's what you should get from your government, that's what you should get from your Prime Minister, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell it to you straight, and I'm going to do the things that we need to do to bring inflation down. And, you know, I'm confident that we're going to do that.
Well, over in the United States, stocks opened lower on the second day of Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell's testimony to lawmakers in Congress. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. So, John, the fallout from Chairman Powell continues.
Yes, I know. It is slowly sinking in, I think, that he might actually be serious about raising interest rates. When he first said it last week, people, including me, weren't entirely sure, because there's a whole thing that they have here about talking tough when you're not actually intending to really be tough. And as you know, we have this set pattern where they go quiet for 2 weeks, they have the meeting, they make the decision, they have the news conference. The news conference always makes headlines. And then twice a year, Chairman Powell comes before the House and the Senate to give a sort of State of the Union, if you will. And that's what he's doing. He was with the House yesterday, he's with the Senate Banking Committee today, and I think again and again he keeps pointing out the need for more interest rate hikes because inflation isn't as under control as he would like, particularly core inflation, which is what you get if you strip out food and energy. So now we've got him talking tough. We note that the Bank of England's got interest rates there at 5%. You just heard from Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. The thing is, we don't know exactly when there might be another interest rate hike. They meet again in July, and then they have a little holiday in the month of August, and then they won't come back again until September. So it could be that they pause again in July and see where they are in September. Nobody really knows. But the markets have been down again this morning. They were sharply down yesterday because of this. The Dow is off by about 43 points at the moment to the negative. And the one thing that he has said new this morning, he has just said to the Senate Banking Committee that he sees a path to subduing US inflation without major job losses. So that's relatively new. And they will meet again on the 25th and 26th of July to make their next decision.
Well, I want to completely change pace now and talk about something I never imagined that we would be talking about, which is two famous tech billionaires might be getting into a cage together. What do I mean?
I know. To fight. I never imagined you'd be asking me about this either, not in a million years. Blame Don Spain. He's our producer. I blame him for most things, actually, and I'm blaming him for this. If you like sweaty men in tight shorts, or indeed sweaty women in bikinis with tank tops on, fighting each other, striking, grappling, fighting along the ground. Our cameraman, Frank, he likes this very much. I can see he's smiling here. If you like all of that, you're going to love this, because two of the world's richest men, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, apparently are up for a cage fight. What happened was Musk tweeted out, "Up for a cage fight with Mark Zuckerberg." And Zuckerberg responded. He actually responded and said, "Send me the location." So the location is going to be the Octagon in Las Vegas, which is owned by the Ultimate Fighting Championship company. And it is basically an 11.5-meter octagon cage. And apparently, if this happens, they're going to have a little fight in there. It's creating a huge amount of excitement on the socials right now. I mean, this is really trending big time. The thing is, Zuckerberg is smaller, okay? He's quite small. But he does study Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He's been doing it for the last 18 months. So we think that gives him an edge if the fight happens. Now, Elon Musk, as you know, is a big guy. And in fact, Mr. Musk, if you're watching, I apologize for this, but I think you're also carrying a few pounds there. I think so. So that puts you at a disadvantage if the fight actually happens. So we will see. The thing is, Zuckerberg responded, so he's kind of painted himself into a corner a little bit here, really. The one good thing, I guess, if it happens, is they could raise a lot of money for charity. Charity.
Well, John, it sounds like you've done a lot of research into this story. We're glad you did, so we didn't have to. John Terrett in New York, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead, rolling out the red carpet in Washington for India's Narendra Modi. We'll be in the United States again to learn why they're cozying up.
Roger, Ricky, loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The US Coast Guard says debris has been found on the seabed near the wreck of the Titanic in the search for a missing submersible with 5 people on board.
Our other headlines, China's premier meets President Macron and urges deeper cooperation with France as he continues his first overseas trip since taking office.
And an explosion at this restaurant in China on the eve of a national holiday. At least 31 people have died.
US President Joe Biden is rolling out the red carpet for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on his state visit to Washington.
The two leaders are set to strengthen defence and technology ties with a slew of trade and defence agreements. Ahead of a state dinner at the White House, Prime Minister Modi will address the US Congress and hold a press conference with President Biden.
Let's talk to our correspondent Jim Spellman in Washington. Jim, if you would, set the scene for us. What's going on?
Well, it is quite a scene here at the White House. Some 7,000 Indian Americans invited to the South Lawn of the White House complex for Prime Minister Modi's arrival. It had a festival-like atmosphere, people shouting, "Modi, Modi," something you just do not see every day at the White House. But, of course, being Washington, part of the custom, also protesters outside of the gates protesting the Prime Minister. As you mentioned, we expect sometime this hour for the President of the United States and the Indian Prime Minister to speak with reporters to take their questions. Then the Prime Minister will travel a couple of kilometers across town to the Capitol, where he'll address a joint session of Congress. That's relatively rare here in the U.S., as is an official state dinner. That's what will happen this evening when the Prime Minister comes back here. It's only the third official state dinner that President Joe Biden has thrown since being in office. We expect a menu that will combine Indian flavors with American cuisine. And at the president's side throughout the day will be the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. Very special day for her. Her mother, of course, was born in India, came to the United States as a teenager, and the Vice President will also preside over that joint session of Congress. Jamie?
Jim, there's no such thing as a free lunch, or come to that, a free state dinner. What's the United States hoping to get out of this?
Yeah, well, so broadly speaking, the U.S. would like to pull India closer economically and militarily. Clearly, a key topic here will be the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Nobody expects the U.S. to somehow convince Ukraine to join the U.S. and to join the United States and other Western powers in backing Ukraine, but they would perhaps like to set the table for India to play a key role in diplomacy should negotiations develop over ending the conflict there. Also, the United States would like to see India less reliant on Russia for energy and arms. As part of that, we can expect two important concrete announcements to be made during this trip. One, that General Electric fighter jet engines will soon be manufactured in India, and that India will have access to buying armed drones from specific manufacturers here in the United States. Now, neither country says the aim of these talks is to discuss China in a major way, but we certainly can expect that to be a thread, at least running through the background of many of these discussions. One thing to keep an eye on is whether U.S. President Joe Biden brings up concerns expressed by many lawmakers here in the United States over so-called human rights concerns in India and allegations that diplomacy in India has eroded under Prime Minister Modi's time in office there. We don't expect that to be a key issue, but we may see the president asked about that at the upcoming press conference. Jamie?
Jim, good to see you. Thanks for that. Our correspondent Jim Spellman in Washington. Now, on this day in the year 1948, the Empire Windrush ship arrived in the UK, bringing almost 500 people from the Caribbean to fill chronic labour shortages in post-war Britain.
It was the first of many such voyages carrying passengers who became known as the Windrush generation. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Yolo Daviv. So this 75th anniversary, how significant is this particular celebration?
It is. It's the Windrush generation, the people that arrived between 1948 and 1973. It's seen as significant because it changed modern Britain. It changed in terms of the diversity and also different communities, especially in urban areas of Britain. And it changed the contribution, the history, the change since the 1940s and 1950s. Lots of different events across Britain today. There has been a service in Surrey Cathedral. There's a performance at the Royal Albert Hall. And also, thousands of children went to Tilbury Docks, where that ship docked in 1948.
Many came in hope and anticipation because there were jobs available and a motherland to support. They arrived in a country still feeling the impact of a 6-year war.
When they came to this country, they were fighting already, and they had to choose their battles. And they had to choose those battles very carefully because every day was a fight for them. You know, they had to fight the weather, they had to fight the environment, they had to fight the people, they had to fight for a place in this society.
Despite slow social acceptance, some flourished. Hazel Reynolds' family, with 11 siblings, supported each other and followed the Christian principles of their parents.
They're all full of hope for the future, so let's make them very welcome as they begin their new life.
In 1948, 500 Jamaicans arrived on the Empire Windrush, aiming for a better standard of living. Some argue that the migrants who emigrated from the Commonwealth countries after the Windrush docked are still fighting for recognition and equality today.
To what extent do we know about the Windrush community? To what extent do we know about diversity of communities within Britain? And furthermore, how many black teachers are there at high levels? How many black professors are there? How many individuals are employed at the highest levels of institutions in Britain?
Some let bygones be bygones and are successful in their respective fields. But for others, the struggle for equality goes on, despite the fact that the British government 75 years ago had invited Caribbean people to live and work as UK citizens at the same time as the National Health Service was established. To commemorate the Windrush generation, an original footbridge used in Tilbury Docks is now an exhibition called A Walkway of Memories.
130 families throughout the UK sent me photographs, sort of, I don't know, family memorabilia. And not only that, they sent tickets, they sent their contracts, some of them, of their parents when they had their first job. And I thought, you know, so that's where all the images came from.
The generations since 1948 have succeeded, despite many difficulties and often the burning injustice of racism.
Well, as well as a Windrush celebration, there, of course, is also a Windrush scandal.
Yes, and it's become quite toxic. This issue is to do with successive UK governments and particularly the Home Office that deals with everything in terms of the interior of Britain. So the law changed in 1973 in terms of people who'd arrived before then with documentation. They were allowed to come and stay here, as we saw in that report. Then suddenly there were questions later in 2012 about documentation, and you needed that documentation to prove who you were in order to have healthcare, housing, a driving license. A lot of those documents have been lost, or children had come on the passports of their parents. Suddenly it became very complex and very difficult. It also led, at the time of the Black Lives Matter protest, to try and encourage more people to voice the concern that they had. And that Windrush generation became part of a much deeper problem, especially with successive governments treating people differently to try and stop modern migrants from coming here and trying to take, you know, whatever they could in terms of education, health and access everything. But the problem has been that the proof of burden had to be on the people involved. When you're talking about the 1940s and 50s, it's very different to modern Britain. And what's troubling people even more now is that since 2012, an apology by the then Conservative Prime Minister, Theresa May, in 2018, a promise to be more radical, to reform the Home Office, and still, despite independent reviews, that seems to be faltering again. And this is like an open wound for many people and their descendants, which have been affected. The Home Office would say, despite what there are concerns whether that unit within the Home Office is being disbanded, they would argue £72 million have been paid in compensation and the scheme will stay open as long as it's needed. Not everyone, I think, is convinced of that.
Yolo, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Yolo Abdabith. Well, as heatwaves sweep across Asia, concerns are growing about the impact of climate change on food supply.
Rice, one of the region's most important staple crops, has hit its lowest production level in 20 years. Our correspondent Martin Lowe reports from Thailand.
In many places, the sun has been unrelenting. It can bring drought and water shortage. But elsewhere, excessive rain has led to severe flooding. Extremes of climate that have caused much of the global rice crop to fail. It's led to the biggest shortage in 2 decades.
The main issue is rainfall. Some years we had flash floods that prevented farmers from harvesting in time. Other years, drought damages the rice before the harvest season.
The global shortfall of rice is said to be at least 8.7 million tons. That's the biggest deficit since 2003-2004. Here in Thailand, farmers say they're still coping, but in many places, including China, Pakistan, the US and Europe, the effects have been more severe.
And both China and Pakistan were having flooding situation. I think China, from the number, is down by 3 million tons. Pakistan also roughly down by 3 million tons. China is not really affecting the world market price. Pakistan actually does, though, even though they are a smaller producer, but they export around 4 to 5 million tons in the past. This year they are expected to export 30% less.
Away from the ravages of climate, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has limited the export of grains like corn and wheat. People have been turning to rice as a substitute, adding to demand. Rice is a staple food for around 3.5 billion people across the globe. The shortages are particularly concerning here in Asia Pacific, where around 90% of the world's rice is consumed. The price of rice has soared to an average of $17.30 per hundredweight, more than double the cost in July 2020. That's hitting poorer regions such as Africa, along with parts of Southeast Asia and the Middle East. There's also concern an El Niño weather event may mean further drought.
El Niño basically means less rain in the Southeast Asian, so we are looking at Indonesia, Philippines and also Thailand. And also particularly India. I would say, if anything to be concerned, it's probably more for later part of this year and next year, because if the El Niño come and water is actually less available, it could lead to a lower production.
India, the world's biggest rice exporter, has held back extra supplies for domestic consumption. It's hoped a return to market of Indian rice may help ease the crisis. Martin Lowe, CGTN, in the rice plains of central Thailand.
Well, let's talk to Paolo Sheppi, a climate scientist at Imperial College London. Paolo, welcome. Good to see you. Parts of Asia seeing sweltering heat this summer. Let's start, if we could, in India. Can you give us a sense of the key factors contributing to the severity and the intensity of the heat wave there?
Sure. So this time of the year is typically the hottest time of the year in northern India. It's before the monsoon comes. Now, one factor that's making it even hotter than usual this year is that the monsoon onset is delayed. And so the monsoon brings clouds and rain, and it brings a relief from the heat. And this year, this is coming later, and therefore the conditions are warmer than they normally would be. But so that's one factor. And then the other factor, of course, is climate change and the fact that we know that temperatures are increasing globally. And what this means is that pretty much everywhere, heat waves are getting more frequent and also more intense. So in the same region in northern India, there was already a severe heat wave very recently in April this year, 2023. And colleagues have estimated that it was made approximately 30 times more likely by climate change. And so what we're seeing now is just another manifestation of that, really.
How do the recent heat waves in India and China perhaps fit into this broader pattern of increasing temperatures and heat waves that we're seeing around the world?
Well, so the situation, for context, is greenhouse gas emissions are increasing steadily. Greenhouse gas concentrations are rising, so the greenhouse effect is getting stronger. It makes the Earth warmer. Currently, we're about 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than during the late 19th century. And this may not sound like a lot, but really, from a heat wave and extreme event standpoint, it is really much more than you might think. So, for example, we know that even at the current level of global warming, a heat wave that would have occurred once in 50 years in the previous climate, so before humans caused climate change, nowadays the same heat wave would occur once every 10 years, so 5 times as likely. And so that's really, so this heat wave we're seeing currently is really another manifestation of what we're seeing around the globe, namely that heat waves are getting more frequent and also more intense, and we're breaking a lot of heat records.
We've taken years to get here, but in a matter of seconds, let me ask you, as a climate scientist, I mean, what are your recommendations for governments, policymakers, private individuals to try and do something about this?
Well, the scientific facts are that as long as we continue emitting greenhouse gases, global temperatures will continue rising. So that's a fact. And the corollary of that is only once we stop emitting and we get to net zero emissions will we stabilize global temperatures. So really, the point is that if we want to limit these heat waves and we want to prevent them and other climate impacts from getting even worse, then we need to get to net zero as fast as possible.
Paolo Seppi from Imperial College in London, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Russia accuses Ukraine of attacking a key bridge on the Crimean Peninsula using British missiles.
Zongzi, a sticky rice dumpling, is no doubt the food of choice for many during the Dragon Boat Festival. Several things are needed to make the cute little bundles. Sticky rice, of course, as in its name, bamboo leaves, and string. The fillings vary in different parts of China. People in northern regions usually prefer sweet fillings like dried jujubes, raisins, or sweet potato. While in southern parts of the country, people favor the savory, like salted egg yolk, braised pork, and other kinds of meat. The first thing to do is to wash and soak the sticky rice for at least 2 hours. Get the rest of your ingredients ready, then the fun begins. Make a cone with a clean bamboo leaf, put the rice and your choice of fillings inside, wrap it up, and carefully tie it up. Then it's time to cook. Bring a pot of water to boil and gently drop in the zongzi. In the meantime, you can fix yourself a drink to go with the dumplings, because why not? And after 2 to 3 hours, voila! Bon appetit and happy Dragon Boat Festival!
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Ukraine's President Zelensky has admitted that the counter-offensive against Russian forces is going more slowly than planned, but he insists preserving soldiers' lives remains the priority for Kyiv as the conflict continues.
Russian military chiefs say Ukrainian troops are regrouping in the east and south of the country.
Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova reports now from Moscow.
Well, the Russian officials accuse the Ukrainian side of attacking the bridges that are on the administrative border of the Kherson region and Crimea near Chongar. According to the acting head of the Kherson region, Vladimir Saldo, Ukrainian armed forces have apparently used Storm Shadow cruise missiles that have been supplied from the United Kingdom. He also says that those attacks have taken place at the orders coming from London. He said the traffic has been diverted to a different route. No casualties have been reported, but the road has indeed been damaged. He said that was an attempt to intimidate the local residents, and the road and the bridge will be repaired in a matter of weeks. We have heard the Kremlin saying that they would not provide any comment to this situation, but at the same time, the Russian officials have regularly been complaining about the steady supplies of Western weapons to Ukraine, saying that those only extend the conflict. And earlier this week, Russia's Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that if Ukraine hits the Russian territory, including the Crimea, with the long-range weapons supplied from the West, including HIMARS, as well as the Storm Shadows, then there will be an immediate response from the Russian military at the command centers of Ukraine. And Russian Defense Minister today said that there was a lull, regrouping in the Ukrainian offensive that has suffered significant losses of over 13,000 men over the course of the past 16 days.
And Dasha, what has President Zelensky been saying about these claims of an attack planned on the Zaporizhia nuclear plant?
Well, indeed, we have heard the Ukrainian president accusing Russia of perpetrating a terrorist attack at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Those claims have been dismissed in Moscow as yet another lie. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that the inspectors from the IAEA have just been at the site. Russia is in constant contact with those inspectors and with the organization itself, saying that everything is fine at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Moscow says that indeed Zelensky's claims are yet another lie in this whole story, but also we understand that there will be a visit of the head of the IAEA to Russia, to Kaliningrad, where he will be meeting the head of Russia's Rosatom Likhachov, who talks about the security of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
Much of East Asia is celebrating Dragon Boat Festival, the 5th day of the 5th lunar month. In China, sticky rice dumplings are on the menu for many, but the day is best known for dragon boat racing.
And after COVID lockdowns, business is now booming for those who build the boats. Our correspondent Wang Tianyu reports.
The beat of the drums, the rush of water, and the swing of the paddles. It is that time of the year again as the traditional paddling sport, dragon boat racing, takes over China's rivers and lakes. The 3-day Dragon Boat Festival is in full swing this week.
With 2,000 years of history, China's dragon boat races remains extremely popular below the Yangtze, where plenty of rivers offers perfect stage for competitive races, with each boat having about 20 to 50 paddlers and normally from the same village. Rowers here join forces together to demonstrate their robust teamwork, strength, and endurance.
In the place where I'm in, a small town near southern China's city Guangzhou, the dragon boat races is the biggest traditional civil activity in the year, lasting for nearly a month. And this year, as China relaxed its COVID-19 restrictions, the event is larger than ever. Thus, orders for dragon boats have seen a boom in recent days.
We received quite a lot of orders this year. The first orders came in during the second month of the lunar calendar, and orders now total over 20 dragon boats. We basically had to work overtime every night.
The craftsmanship of dragon boat making is considered a cultural heritage, with older people being the majority of workers. From cut to polish, each boat would take at least a week to make. In another traditional shipyard in Zhongtang town, this year's Dragon Boat Frenzy has forced the half-a-century-old manufacturing base to turn down some orders.
This year we have so many orders. I received orders for 9. I wouldn't dare to take on more when there are too many orders because I won't be able to manage them. We are already working 11 to 12 hours every day with barely any time to rest.
The boat itself is now the only business opportunity from the races. Uniforms, firecrackers, and even local delicacies contribute to the consumption derived from the event. Nowadays, the dragon boat racing has gone far beyond being just a competition. It gives people who work in cities away from their hometowns a great reason to come back. Some paddlers here told me they applied a couple of days off just to participate in the games, and more importantly, paddle together for their hometowns.
Our correspondent Wang Tianyu reporting.
The headlines again. The United States Coast Guard says debris has been found on the seabed near the wreck of the Titanic in the search for the missing submarine with 5 people on board.
China's premier meets President Macron and urges deeper cooperation with France as he continues his first overseas trip since taking office.
And rolling out the red carpet in Washington as President Biden and India's Narendra Modi look to strengthen defence and technology ties.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.